And good evening. It's November 21st, 2023. In this Outside the Class series, we're continuing a study of a person that has fascinated me since I picked up the Bible. It's Jonah. Tonight, we're going to continue our reflections on challenging God with Rabbi David Fohrman from Aleph Beta. On the dustyfeet.com, in the Outside the Class section, we have the Challenging God source video set up for review. Because the purpose of Outside the Class is for you to listen to the in-class lectures first. That would be in the source video playlist. Because with this way of doing things, you can watch the video before we begin chatting. We still hope to keep these to around 15 to 20 minutes or so. We still want to make them easy to catch and even easier to catch up on. So we're going to continue our Challenging God series with What is Truth? With Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet. And before we forget, if you find these kind of podcasts useful, then click the subscribe button. The reminders, they just help you. Also, you think these might be useful to others, that's when you click the like button, because that is the way that YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. Okay, challenging God. What is truth? Right? So last episode, we ended with the question, who is Jonah? Yeah? Remember, when we talked about it before, he's Jonah, son of Amittai. Amittai, my truth. These are the very words that Jonah leaves out. He leaves out truth. So what might we mean by truth, right? Because truth can be a very abstract kind of concept, very good for mathematical kinds of things. Like the example the rabbi gave, 2 plus 2 equals 4. It's true. 2 plus 2 equals 5. It's false. What's it look like in the real world? The world we act in, where every act there's a consequence. Newton expressed in his third law of motion that for every action, right, there's an equal and opposite reaction. As the rabbi shared, if one billiard ball hits another billiard ball, then the second ball is going to move. This is what it looks like in the real world, right? That act and consequence. So what if we looked at this equation as justice? Act on one side, and consequence on the other side. So it seems that justice can also have a religious concept as well. Rabbi Fohrman brought up an intriguing thought when people talk with this, when they mention religion, right? His question was, is this one of the things that attracts them to it, right? Justice. Because we know people talk about God as love, spirituality, prayer, devotion, community. But does justice enter the discussion? Nothing like seeing divine courtroom of justice in action. I'm thinking very few. Truthfully, if any, are drawn to religion at all this way, and it's definitely not an attractive thought. Yet in Judaism, as the rabbi put it, it's a very important concept. There's an entire segment of the calendar devoted to it, the days of justice. So before we jump ahead, right, I tend to lean that churchianity has a related thought, this divine justice. But the thing that wiggles its way in is the proposition of escaping that justice. It's very much part of this side. We preach the escape hell plan, the way to escape the justice of a just God, although we tend to leave out the just God part. Our importance is in escape, that justice is only for them. And that them list, that's just going to vary from denomination to denomination. We talk about a just God, and excuse the pun, or not, just not for us. Rabbi Foreman brings up some very compelling points that I think are worthy of discussion. Because this is the tie, this is the red string to Rosh Hashanah, the Day of Justice, and Jonah. So for those of us who acknowledge and experience the Moedim, these feasts of God, this Day of Atonement is one of them. And remember when we started, we didn't need to see this connection between this Day of Atonement, this Day of Justice, and the scroll of Jonah. So here we are on Rosh Hashanah, and the notion of God sitting on his throne of justice. It's probably not the most attractive attribute. And yet, this is a day to be remembered, yeah? We eat well on really tasty food. We celebrate this day of din, this day of justice. Strange reaction to justice. Then the rabbi coined a phrase that caught my ear. He said, "What is nourishing about divine justice?" And he postulates that Jonah, this son of truth, is in effect asking us to take a hard look at that very question. So the rabbi, he proposes 2 thought experiments. And I love thought experiments. So here we go. So imagine a world in which divine justice was compromised in some way. Experiment 1. Imagine for a moment that it's the end of 120 years and your time on earth is up. Your soul approaches the gates of heaven. Now, there are 2 possible scenarios. Pick which one you would prefer. Scenario 1. You're met by an angel who is handling crowd control at the gates. The angel is very apologetic and explains to you that their whole system's a bit taxed at the moment and the Almighty simply can't be bothered to spare any time to talk to you right now. The angel gives you a quick look up and down and he offers you a seat up in the mezzanine. You can hang out there. Enjoy. You know what the funny thing is? That's my favorite seat in the theater, right? It's the ones I wanted to sit in the most. That's scenario 1. Scenario 2. God is the master of the universe, your creator, the Almighty. He sits down with you and goes over your whole life. From the first time you learned to walk, to the time that you defended your friend from a bully in the 7th grade, to the time you watched your own children learn how to walk. You walked your own children down the aisle. You feel a tremendous amount of pride because God cares and he's so proud of you for all of that. Yet you also see moments that you failed, moments you yelled at your kids and it wasn't their fault. When we fail in life, hurting instead of protecting those around us. When you were in church, instead of focusing on the teaching, you were thinking about the World Series. In these moments, they're embarrassing and they're painful. Yet this is your life. It's good and it's bad, all of its rich colors and all of its hues. The joy you feel is ecstatic. Disappointment, searing. God goes through your life and shows you his view of all of it. All those little trees, those seeds, those decisions that you made, they all added up to become a forest. You know, it sounds a lot like sowing and reaping, don't you think? You now get to see the grand significance of your life in God's eyes, right? In God's tapestry of time. Why your life mattered to God and why it mattered to those around you. So the second scenario, it involves divine justice. The first, no justice at all. Which would you want? No, I was impressed that the rabbi was so candid, right? Confessing that on many days, even most days, he'd prefer the first. The brutal honesty, it's probably like that for most, if not all of us. Probably the focus of escaping justice. It just seems easier and simpler. I'll just take the pass from God and I'll sit in the mezzanine with my comfortable seat with my peanuts and my view. I'm totally good. But divine justice? The mere motion of it is scary. Yet, deep down, I hope I'd like to be the person that would choose the second scenario. Because the second scenario, even if it involves pain, means that my life meant something. Because in the first scenario, the question I'm left wondering is, did it matter? I spent 50, 60, 70, 80 years doing the best I knew how to do, living life, and this is it? This seat in the mezzanine level with peanut shells beneath my feet? I feel alone while wondering, what did it all mean? Why did it even bother so much? What really was my life for? There's something kind of hollow about option one. But Din, justice, lends a kind of meaning to life because everything matters. Because now I see how every act had consequences, and how consequences didn't come out of nowhere. My actions, they created them. But they also made a difference in the world. It's something to ponder. Yeah? Okay. So here's the thought experiment number 2. God forbid. Imagine that somebody really close to you, a child, a sister, a brother, was the victim of a terrible crime, the victim of something truly horrible at the hand of a brash and malicious attacker. The trial begins, and then one day the judge calls you into his chambers. I want you to imagine the following nightmare scenario. The judge says, look, I've spoken with the defendant, and he's willing to come by your home for a drink one night. He's going to offer you his apologies for what may or may not have occurred on the night of May 12th. And then I'd like to call a press conference and just dismiss all the charges. It's time to let bygones be bygones and move on. If the judge said that to you, how would you want to respond? As for me, I was already starting to squirm in my seat. Truthfully, it would be a terrible, terrible nightmare. But it's not the most terrible nightmare. There's actually an even worse nightmare. Actually, exactly the same situation, except for one difference. The identity of the judge. Because it's not a human judge anymore. It's God. As for me, it caught my breath. How would we respond? I have a feeling that we see ourselves a bit more now in Jonah. Remember from our last series? He's us. So we're going to explore this more in next week's episode with Challenging God, Escaping God. So, thanks for being with us tonight with Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet.